Listen carefully. What I am about to share is not for everyone. This message is urgent, and it is sacred. If you are not walking the divine path of God, if your heart is not aligned with His truth, this video is not meant for you. You may leave now without loss. But if you are a true follower of God, if you have always felt different, called, set apart without knowing why, then stay. This message was released for God's chosen ones only, and the fact that it has reached you now tells me something important. It has arrived at the exact moment heaven intended. Not early, not late, right on time. Chosen one. Some people are called later in life, but others are chosen from the cradle, marked before they could speak, watched before they could walk, protected even when they did not understand why life felt heavier for them. Tonight, I am going to reveal 7 undeniable signs that prove God's hand was on your life from the very beginning. And I promise you this, by the time you reach the end, many unanswered questions from your past will finally make sense. Before we continue, chosen ones, give a like to this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, tap the bell icon, share this message with other chosen ones who need this confirmation, and comment 777 in the comments to declare that you are aligned with the divine purpose God placed on your life. Sign 1. Marked before you could speak. There are some people who come into this world quietly, unnoticed by the spiritual realm. And then there are others who arrive already marked, already known, already seen. Chosen one, if you are listening to me right now, this first sign will touch something deep inside you because it has been with you since the very beginning. Before you could speak a word, before you understood right from wrong, before you could even remember your own childhood clearly, God's hand was already upon you. Scripture tells us that God knows us before we are formed in the womb. But for the chosen, that knowing is not passive. It is intentional. It is deliberate. It is purposeful. From the cradle, your life carried a different weight. You may not have had the words for it back then, but something about you stood out. Even as a child, you were not like the others. You observed more. You felt more. You noticed things other children ignored. While others played without care, your mind wandered into deeper thoughts. You questioned things that made no sense. You sensed emotions in rooms before anyone spoke. That was not imagination. That was awareness. Many chosen ones experienced unusual circumstances early in life. Some faced sickness and survived when the odds were against them. Some were protected in accidents that should have ended their story. Some were born into chaos, yet something invisible kept intervening. You may look back now and realize there were moments when your life could have taken a dark turn, but somehow you were spared. That was not luck. That was covering. You see, when God chooses someone early, He also assigns protection early. The enemy recognizes divine potential long before the world does, and because of that, the chosen are often guarded fiercely by God Himself. Angels move quietly. Doors close without explanation. People are removed without warning. All of this happens long before you understand what faith even means. As a child, you may have felt misunderstood. Adults may have told you that you were too sensitive, too quiet, too intense, or too different. But what they were really seeing was depth. They were seeing a soul that did not belong to shallow places. You carried an old wisdom in a young body, and the world did not know what to do with that. Some of you grew up feeling like you never fully fit anywhere. Even in loving environments, you felt separate. Even among friends, you felt alone. Not because you were unloved, but because your spirit was not meant to blend in. Chosen ones are not designed to disappear into crowds. They are designed to stand apart, even when it hurts. And let me say this gently, but truthfully. If you were chosen from the cradle, your childhood was never meant to be easy. Ease does not produce spiritual strength. Comfort does not sharpen discernment. God does not waste early years on those He plans to use greatly. He begins the shaping process early, quietly, and thoroughly. Some of you matured emotionally far earlier than others. You understood pain before you understood joy. You learned silence before you learned celebration. You noticed suffering in others while still needing comfort yourself. That early emotional weight was not cruelty. It was preparation. God was teaching your spirit how to carry responsibility long before your mind could explain it. Even the way people reacted to you as a child matters. Some were drawn to you without knowing why. Others felt uneasy around you for no clear reason. Light exposes what is hidden, even in adults. Your presence stirred things you did not cause and could not control. That is what happens when a chosen soul enters the room. If you are feeling emotional right now, that is okay. Let it come. This is not about reopening wounds. This is about understanding them. Healing begins when confusion ends, and today, confusion is losing its grip on you. Chosen one, nothing about your early life was random. Not the pain, not the protection, not the difference. God was writing your story before you learned how to read it. You were marked before you could speak, watched before you could walk, and guarded before you could pray. And this is only the first sign. What comes next will explain even more about why your life unfolded the way it did. Stay with me. Your story is making sense now. Sign 2. Early suffering that made no sense. Chosen one, this is where many of you quietly nod your head, because this sign explains a pain you have carried for a long time without words. Your suffering started early. Too early. Before you had the strength, the language, or the understanding to explain it. And for years it made no sense to you. As a child, you may have felt a heaviness that other children did not seem to carry. While others laughed freely, you were learning endurance. While others were protected from harsh realities, you were being introduced to them. Loss, rejection, emotional neglect, misunderstanding, or instability may have entered your life far sooner than it should have. And for a long time you may have wondered, why me? What did I do to deserve this? Let me speak clearly and without hesitation. That suffering was not punishment. It was not abandonment. And it was not proof that God forgot you. It was evidence that God trusted you. God does not give heavy training to weak vessels. He prepares his strongest servants early because their calling will demand depth, compassion, and endurance that cannot be developed later. What you went through shaped your spirit long before it shaped your personality. Some of you were rejected in places where you should have been nurtured. You tried to earn love instead of receiving it freely. You learned how to read moods, walk on emotional eggshells, and protect your heart before you even knew what a heart truly was. That was painful, yes. But it also made you perceptive. It made you empathetic. It made you aware of pain in others without them speaking a word. Others of you were burdened with responsibility too soon. You grew up fast. You were the strong one, the quiet one, the one who held things together. No one asked if you were okay, because you looked like you could handle it, and you did handle it, but it cost you something inside. Chosen one, hear me carefully. God allows early suffering in the chosen because their future work will involve healing others. And you cannot heal what you do not understand. You cannot guide others through darkness if you have never walked through it yourself. Your suffering trained your spirit in ways comfort never could. It taught you humility without bitterness. It taught you patience without weakness. It taught you faith even when answers were silent. Even when you did not yet know God deeply, something inside you kept going. Something refused to give up. That was grace working before you recognized it. I know some of you struggled with anger toward God, even if you never said it out loud. You watched others receive what you prayed for. You wondered why life seemed unfair. And you felt guilty for questioning him, so you buried those feelings deep. Let me lift that weight off you right now. God was never offended by your confusion. He saw your heart. He saw your endurance. He saw you surviving when you should have broken. Early suffering also teaches chosen one's discernment. You learned who was safe and who was not. You learned when silence was wiser than speech. You learned that not everyone who smiles means well. These lessons were harsh, but they were necessary. The calling on your life requires wisdom, not naivety. And here is something very important. Many chosen ones try to minimize their pain by telling themselves it was not that bad. They compare their story to others and silence their own wounds. Stop doing that. Pain does not need comparison to be valid. What hurt you mattered, and God never ignored it. The enemy often attacks chosen ones early because he knows delay is his only weapon. He cannot destroy what God has chosen, so he tries to confuse it, discourage it, or exhaust it before it discovers its identity. But look at you. You are still here, still seeking truth, still listening, still standing. That alone tells me everything I need to know. Your early suffering gave you emotional depth. It made you thoughtful. It made you reflective. It made you someone who understands struggle without judgment. And one day you will realize that people trust you with their pain because you carry yours with grace. If you are feeling a sense of release right now, that is not accidental. Understanding transforms wounds into wisdom. You were never weak for hurting early. You were strong for surviving it. Chosen one, your suffering made no sense then because it was preparing you for a future you could not yet see. And now, slowly, gently, that future is beginning to reveal itself. And there is more, because the next sign explains why, even with all that pressure, your spirit was never fully broken. Stay with me. Your story is unfolding exactly as it should. Sign 3. A spirit that could not be controlled. Chosen one, this sign has followed you quietly your entire life, even when you did not know how to name it. No matter how early the pressure came, no matter how strong the voices around you were, something inside you refused to be owned. Your spirit could not be controlled. And that was never rebellion. That was preservation. From a young age, you sensed when something was off. Even when adults spoke with authority, even when rules were placed in front of you, you felt an inner check when things did not align with truth. You may have obeyed outwardly, but inwardly, your spirit stayed awake. You were not easily programmed. You did not blindly follow crowds. You questioned quietly. You resisted inwardly. And many times, you paid a price for that. People may have labeled you as stubborn, difficult, or strong-willed. Some may have said you were too opinionated, too intense, or too hard to mold. But what they were really encountering was a spirit God had already sealed. When God chooses someone early, He protects their core. He allows shaping, yes, but He does not allow ownership by the world. You see, chosen ones can be guided, but they cannot be dominated. They can be taught, but they cannot be broken. Even when circumstances forced you into silence, your inner voice remained loud. Even when fear tried to cage you, your spirit kept pacing, waiting for freedom. Some of you grew up in environments that tried to suppress who you were. You were told to be smaller, quieter, less curious, less expressive. You learned how to blend in for survival, but deep down you always knew that was not your true shape. And even when you tried to conform, it never felt natural. It felt like wearing a garment that did not belong to you. Chosen one, that discomfort was divine. God was protecting your authenticity. He was making sure you never fully surrendered your inner authority to people, systems, or beliefs that could not carry your calling. This is why manipulation never truly worked on you. It may have confused you for a season. It may have slowed you down. But it never owned you. You always eventually saw through it. You always eventually pulled away. You always eventually chose truth, even when it cost you relationships, comfort, or approval. Let me tell you something important. A controllable spirit is a usable spirit for the world. But an uncontrollable spirit, one that answers only to God, is dangerous to darkness. That is why pressure came early. That is why correction often felt harsh. That is why people tried to label your independence as a flaw. They were trying to name what they could not tame. Even in moments where you doubted yourself, something inside you refused to fully submit to despair. You may have bent, but you did not break. You may have paused, but you did not surrender. You may have questioned, but you did not lose your core. And here is the part many of you need to hear. That inner resistance was not sin. It was discernment before you had language for it. God placed a filter in your spirit. Not everything was allowed to pass through you. Not every voice was allowed to shape you. Not every idea was allowed to settle. That filter protected your destiny. As you grew older, this trait may have isolated you. You did not always fit into social boxes. You did not thrive in environments built on surface-level thinking. You saw through illusions quickly. You felt restless in shallow conversations, and sometimes you wondered if something was wrong with you. Let me answer that clearly. Nothing was wrong. You were just not built for small spaces. Chosen ones are designed to lead, not to be absorbed. And leadership begins with an untouchable core. God knew that your calling would place you in environments where compromise would be tempting. So he made sure early on that your spirit could not be fully conditioned. This is also why guilt never fully controlled you. Conviction guided you, yes, but shame never owned you. Even when you made mistakes, even when you wandered, something inside you always pulled you back to alignment. That pull is not human willpower. That is divine imprint. If you are listening right now and feeling a quiet relief, that is your spirit recognizing itself. You were never difficult. You were protected. You were never rebellious. You were preserved. You were never too much. You were just not meant to be controlled. And as time moves forward, this quality will become even more important, because the calling ahead of you requires courage, clarity, and inner authority. God cannot entrust that kind of work to someone whose spirit belongs to the world. Chosen one, your uncontrollable spirit is not something to fix. It is something to honor. God guarded it from the cradle because he knew one day it would be needed. And the next sign will explain why, even with this strong spirit, you often felt guided from within, as if something unseen was always speaking to you. Stay with me. You are understanding yourself now in ways you never have before. Sign 4, an inner voice that never left you. Chosen one, this sign is quiet, but it is powerful. It does not shout. It does not force. It simply stays. Long before you understood prayer, long before you opened scripture with intention, there was something inside you that spoke. Not in words you could always explain, but in nudges, warnings, impressions, and knowing. An inner voice that never left you. As a child, you may not have called it guidance. You may have thought it was imagination or intuition. But even then, it steered you. It told you when to step back. It unsettled you when something was wrong. It calmed you when fear tried to take over. That was not coincidence. That was God whispering before you learned how to listen. Chosen ones are given discernment early, not because they understand it, but because they need it. Your path was never meant to be reckless. There were dangers you could not see with your eyes, but your spirit sensed them. You avoided certain people without knowing why. You felt uneasy in certain places without explanation. You changed direction at the last moment and only later realized what you had been spared from. That inner voice saved you more times than you can count. Some of you ignored it in your youth. That is normal. Growth involves learning through resistance, but even when you ignored it, it did not abandon you. It waited. It spoke again. It corrected gently. It warned firmly when needed. It never shamed you. It simply guided you back. This is how you know it was divine. God's voice corrects without crushing. It convicts without condemning. It guides without controlling. And that is exactly how your inner voice has always worked. You may have struggled to explain your decisions to others. People asked why you left that relationship, that job, that path. You could not always articulate it. You just knew. That knowing came from alignment, not impulse. It was discernment working quietly. There were moments when logic told you to stay, but something inside you said leave. Moments when fear told you to stop, but something inside you said continue. Moments when others pushed you forward, but your spirit said wait. And when you listened, even if it was uncomfortable, things eventually made sense. Chosen one, this inner guidance is not reserved for the perfect. It is given to the chosen. It does not mean you never struggle. It means you are never alone in your struggle. God walks with you internally before he moves externally. Some of you felt this voice most strongly during emotional pain. When you were at your lowest, it whispered endurance. When you wanted to quit, it whispered patience. When you felt lost, it whispered trust. And sometimes it whispered nothing at all, teaching you to sit still and breathe. That silence was also guidance. As you matured spiritually, you may have realized that this inner voice grew clearer the closer you moved toward God. Not louder, but clearer, less emotional, more steady, less urgent, more assured. That is alignment. That is spiritual maturity. And let me say this carefully. The world tries to numb this voice. Distraction, noise, pressure, and fear all work against it. But yours never fully went silent. Even when you wandered, even when you doubted, even when you were tired, it stayed. That is not normal intuition. That is the Holy Spirit working ahead of time, preparing you, protecting you, teaching you how to hear without fear. If you have ever said, "I do not know how I knew, but I knew, this is why." If you have ever trusted something unseen and later thanked God for it, this is why. If you have ever felt guided even when confused, this is why. Chosen one, God has always been closer to you than you realized. He did not wait for you to find him. He walked with you while you were still finding yourself. And the next sign will explain why, despite this guidance, you were often pulled into seasons of isolation. Seasons that felt lonely but were deeply purposeful. Stay with me. What felt like silence was never absence. Sign 5. Separation before elevation. Chosen one, this sign is one of the most misunderstood, and also one of the most painful. Long before you ever thought about purpose, calling, or destiny, separation found you. Not once, not accidentally, but repeatedly. People drifted. Friendships ended without clear reasons. Environments that once felt familiar suddenly became uncomfortable, and you were left asking yourself why it kept happening. Let me tell you the truth plainly. God separates before he elevates. From early on, you experienced endings that felt premature. You outgrew people faster than expected. Conversations no longer fed you. Places that once felt safe began to feel heavy. And even when you tried to hold on, something kept pulling you away. That pull was not rejection, it was redirection. Chosen ones cannot remain in environments that stunt their spirit, and because of that, God often removes them before they fully understand why. If he explained every separation ahead of time, fear would interfere. So he moves quietly, gently, firmly. As a child or teenager, you may have felt alone even when surrounded by others. Not because you lacked people, but because you lacked resonance. Your spirit was operating on a different frequency. And when frequencies do not match, connection becomes draining. You felt this early. That is why you learned solitude before you learned companionship. Some of you blamed yourselves. You wondered if something was wrong with you, why you could not maintain long-term friendships the way others did, why people misunderstood you, why you always felt like the outsider. Hear me now. That was not a flaw. That was filtration. God does not elevate chosen ones in crowds. He shapes them in quiet. He refines them in separation. He teaches them how to hear him clearly before surrounding them with noise. Isolation is not abandonment when it is divine. There were seasons when it felt like everything familiar was stripped away. People you trusted changed. Support you expected disappeared. And you stood alone, confused, hurt, and questioning God. But even in those moments, something kept you steady. You did not fall apart the way others might have. You felt pain, yes, but you also felt held. That is because separation does not come empty-handed. It comes with clarity. In isolation, you began to understand yourself. You confronted wounds you had avoided. You faced fears you had buried. You learned how to sit with your thoughts without distraction. That kind of inner work cannot happen in crowded spaces. Chosen one, God isolates those he intends to speak to deeply, not because they are unwanted, but because they are needed. Noise dulls discernment. Crowds weaken conviction. God had to pull you away so your spirit could breathe. Some of you experienced separation even within family. You felt different. You thought differently. You saw things others did not want to see. That does not mean you are better. It means you are called differently, and different callings require different paths. You may have noticed that whenever you tried to force connection where it no longer belonged, exhaustion followed, anxiety followed, confusion followed, but when you finally let go, even through tears, peace eventually returned. That peace was confirmation. Separation also protected you. There were paths others walked that would have destroyed you, habits you were spared from, influences that did not attach themselves to you. God blocked access early, not to limit you, but to preserve you. This is why chosen ones often bloom later. While others are distracted by external validation, you are being rooted internally. While others are chasing approval, you are learning alignment. And when elevation comes, it comes with stability, not ego. Let me say this clearly. If you are in a season of separation right now, do not rush it. Do not beg for what God has removed. Do not chase what no longer fits. This season is doing a work in you that connection could not. Elevation without preparation destroys. God refuses to destroy what he chose. Chosen one, separation was never the end of your story. It was the hallway between who you were and who you are becoming, and the loneliness you felt was not empty. It was full of purpose. The next sign will explain why, even with protection and guidance, you faced internal battles that felt spiritual long before you understood God. Stay with me. You are closer to understanding your journey than ever before. Sign 6, spiritual attacks before understanding God. No, chosen one. This sign is often the most confusing because it happened before you had the language to describe it. Before you knew what spiritual warfare meant. Before you understood prayer, faith, or authority. Yet the battle was already there. Quiet at times. Heavy at others. You felt it, even when you could not explain it. Many of you faced inner struggles very early. Fear that came without reason. Anxiety that did not match your circumstances. Sudden waves of sadness, heaviness, or restlessness that appeared out of nowhere. You were too young to name it, yet too aware to ignore it. And adults around you may have dismissed it, telling you it was just a phase, just sensitivity, just imagination. But you knew it was deeper. Let me speak clearly and calmly. Darkness recognizes light long before light recognizes itself. When God marks a soul early, the opposition notices early, not because you were weak, but because you were dangerous to the enemy's plans. The attacks were not proof of vulnerability. They were proof of value. Some of you battled intense thoughts, not always destructive, but intrusive. Questions about life, death, meaning, purpose. You felt a weight on your mind that other children did not seem to carry. Your inner world was active, complex, and sometimes overwhelming. And yet, something always stopped you from going too far into despair. That something was protection. Even when you felt lost, you were never abandoned. Even when confusion clouded your thoughts, clarity eventually returned. Even when fear knocked loudly, it was never allowed to stay permanently. You were shaken, but not overtaken. Others of you experienced spiritual opposition through people. Bullying, targeted rejection, unprovoked hostility. You did not do anything to deserve it, yet you were singled out. Light irritates darkness simply by existing, and people often project what they cannot understand or control. Some of you sensed a heaviness in certain environments, rooms that felt wrong, situations that drained you. You felt relief the moment you left, even if nothing obvious had happened. That was discernment before doctrine. Your spirit was detecting what your mind had not yet learned to interpret. And here is something important. Chosen ones often experience attacks internally rather than externally. The enemy aims for confusion, doubt, fatigue, and distraction. Not destruction. Because destruction would expose the plan too early. Confusion is quieter, slower, more subtle. You may have questioned your worth without knowing why. You may have felt undeserving even when you did nothing wrong. You may have struggled with self-doubt despite having strength. That internal conflict was not your nature. It was resistance to your nature. But look at what happened instead. You survived. You adapted. You became reflective instead of reckless, thoughtful instead of impulsive, aware instead of numb. The attacks refined you instead of ruining you. Chosen one, God never allows an attack without limitation. There were lines the enemy could not cross. There were moments you should have collapsed, but you did not. Moments you should have given up, but you held on. Even when you did not know why you were holding on, you did. That was grace operating quietly. As you grew older and began to understand God more clearly, you may have realized something powerful. The intensity decreased when alignment increased. The noise softened when faith strengthened. The fear loosened when truth settled in. That was not coincidence. That was authority being activated. And let me tell you this with assurance. The attacks did not mean you were failing. They meant you were advancing. Resistance increases when progress is near. The enemy does not waste energy on empty vessels. Some of you still feel remnants of these battles. Moments of heaviness, flickers of doubt, sudden fatigue. That does not mean you are losing. It means you are still valuable. And now, unlike before, you are aware. Awareness changes everything. You are no longer fighting blindly. You are no longer confused about the source. You are no longer defenseless. What once overwhelmed you now bows to understanding. Chosen one, the fact that you endured spiritual pressure before understanding God tells me this. Your life was never ordinary. Your spirit was never unnoticed. And your survival was never accidental. You were protected before you could pray, guarded before you could believe, strengthened before you could stand. And the final sign will bring all of this together. It will explain why, no matter how far you wandered, something always pulled you back to purpose. Stay with me. You are about to see the full picture. Sign 7, a calling that refuses to be silenced. Chosen one, this final sign ties everything together. It is the thread that runs through your entire life, even when the pattern looked broken. No matter how far you wandered, no matter how confused you became, no matter how tired or discouraged you felt, something inside you never went quiet. Your calling refused to be silenced. You may have tried to ignore it. Many of you did. You told yourself to be practical, to settle, to choose the easier path. You tried to fit into roles that looked acceptable on the outside but felt empty on the inside. You distracted yourself with work, relationships, routines, or responsibilities. And for a moment, it almost worked. Almost. But then the restlessness returned. There was always a sense that your life was meant for more than survival, more than routine, more than comfort. You could enjoy moments, yes, but deep satisfaction remained just out of reach. Not because you were ungrateful, but because you were unfinished. Your spirit knew there was an assignment attached to your existence. Chosen ones cannot fully escape their calling. They can delay it. They can resist it. They can run from it for a season. But they cannot erase it. God does not revoke what he establishes. This is why, even in your lowest moments, something kept pulling you back toward truth. You wandered, but you did not disappear. You stumbled, but you did not stay down. You questioned, but you did not abandon faith completely. There was always a return, always a nudge, always a reminder. Sometimes that reminder came through pain, other times through longing, sometimes through sudden clarity, other times through exhaustion with a life that did not fit. However it came, it worked. You always found yourself back here, listening, seeking, remembering. That pull you feel is not pressure. It is alignment calling you home. Many of you felt this calling long before you felt capable of answering it. You sensed you were meant to help others, to guide, to heal, to speak truth, to carry light into dark places. But you did not feel ready. So you waited. And God allowed the waiting because readiness is built, not rushed. This is also why your life felt like a series of starts and stops. Progress followed by pause. Movement followed by stillness. Each cycle was teaching you something. Patience, humility, discernment, strength. God was shaping the messenger before releasing the message. Let me say something important. A calling that refuses to be silenced is not a burden. It is evidence of trust. God does not place persistent purpose in fragile vessels. He places it in those he knows will eventually answer, even if the journey takes time. You may have noticed that when you tried to ignore this calling completely, discomfort increased. Anxiety grew, peace faded. But when you leaned into truth even slightly, something inside you settled. That is alignment restoring balance. Chosen one, your calling is not about being seen. It is about being effective. It is not about applause. It is about obedience. And God has been patient with you, not because you were slow, but because he was thorough. Now, here you are, not perfect, not finished, but aware of your depth, aware of your journey, aware that your life carries meaning beyond your own comfort. This awareness did not arrive by accident. It came because the season is shifting. The confusion that once surrounded your purpose is lifting. The fear that once kept you silent is loosening. The doubt that once slowed you down is losing authority. You are not late. You are not behind. You are not disqualified. You were chosen from the cradle, prepared through pressure, refined through separation, guarded through battle, and guided through silence. And now, the calling that has followed you your entire life is no longer asking quietly. It is standing in front of you, steady and clear. Chosen one, this is not the end of your story. This is the moment it begins to make sense. Conclusion. Confirmation, calm, and commission. Chosen one, take a slow breath right now. Let your shoulders relax. Let your mind settle. What you have just heard was not new information. It was confirmation. Deep down, you already knew these truths. Your spirit recognized them long before your mind caught up. And that recognition is bringing calm, not excitement, not fear, but peace. Your life finally makes sense now. The early pain, the separation, the inner voice, the resistance, the battles. None of it was random. None of it was wasted. God has been consistent with you even when life felt chaotic. He was never absent. He was always shaping. Being chosen is not about being superior. It is about being responsible. Responsible for growth. Responsible for healing. Responsible for walking in truth even when it is uncomfortable. And you have been doing that work quietly for a long time. You are not broken. You were built differently. You are not delayed. You were being prepared. You are not forgotten. You were being guarded. And now, there is a gentle commission taking place inside you. Not a loud command, not pressure, just clarity. A knowing that it is time to walk with more confidence, more faith, and less apology. Time to stop doubting what God has already confirmed through your entire life. Do not rush. Do not compare. Do not look back with regret. Everything unfolded exactly as it needed to. Trust that the same God who protected you in silence will guide you in visibility. Before we end, chosen ones, give a like to this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, tap the bell icon, share this message with other chosen ones who need this confirmation, and comment 777 in the comments as a declaration that you are aligned, aware, and ready to walk in the purpose God placed on your life. Remember this and carry it with you. You are exactly where God wants you to be, and He is not finished with you yet.